Welcome CSE 103, Intro to Computing, to our PowerPoint on databases. So I'm going to run through this little presentation for you, and I'll try to go through it as fast as possible. And feel free to yell out at the screen when you see this. When it says, what is a database? Just start yelling out things. It'll make it more interactive. Well, okay, here's the answers. A collection of information that is organized so that it can be easily accessed, managed, and updated. That makes sense. If you have a lot of stuff, you need to be able to organize it. You need to be able to access the information. You need to manage it and update it. Now, again, if you're a company and you have a couple hundred customers, things like that, you may be able to manage them in an Excel spreadsheet. But if you have thousands of clients, thousands of customers, you have thousands of items of inventory and sales and things like that, you're probably going to need a database to help manage things, to help find things. You're going to need tools to help manage all of that information. Before we get into running a business and databases like that, what databases do you personally manage? Feel free to yell out things as well. Emails, just think of real basic things. Emails, files on your computer. Just for example, I'll go here on my computer, and here's files here. And this is just the first thing that came up. And again, I have it organized here by name. These are the columns or fields that we'll talk about later in the presentation. This is by name, date modified, size, kind. There's other categories I could have in there. You could group things by all this kind of stuff. The application that created it, date added, date modified, whenever you need to find things, because you need to find things on your computer. I may need to delete things, so I may need to go over here and say, well, what's the biggest files that are here? Oh, this is 1.13 gig. I'm going to get rid of these and dump them off my computer because they're taking up a lot of space. Or maybe I have to look for something that I just worked on yesterday. And I worked on PS3 turkeys or something like that. So we're always managing this kind of stuff. Even emails, you manage them by who did you send it to? Who did you receive it from? What was the subject? What date was it sent? When did you get that email? All that kind of stuff. So you manage your emails, you manage files on a computer, music, pictures, movies, all that kind of stuff. Now, you don't manage Amazon and Google stuff, but you use it all the time. You need to go through and see all your items that you've bought in the past. You may have to go through things that you've bought in the past couple years or something to reorder stuff. You do web searching with Google. That's a huge database of websites that you'll search by, keywords and things like that. You may do research for research papers. You may be in school where you have to do a lot of research papers. And again, any collection of info that you need to sort through and locate things. You'll need something more than just a Excel spreadsheet. Now, how is the information organized in a database? Well, I just showed you fields and categories, just like application, kind, date modified, all that kind of stuff. Now, that's files on a computer. Now, there's different kinds of information that are organized different way. If it's people, it's organized by name and ID number, all that kind of stuff. But fields and categories are the criteria. And here's some examples here. Student ID, social security number. If you look at you being a student, last name, first name. And obviously you can narrow it down if you might say, well, why would they ask for just first name? Well, maybe there's something where there's a number of the same last names, and they need to find which the first name is, or what the middle name is, or your birth date, or anything like that. You could have the same name as a parent, but they need to know your birth date. All this kind of stuff will help narrow things down. And the idea with databases, you want to find the one that's the single identifier that can't be duplicated, like social security number, like a student ID, or something like that. Other people may have the same last name, first name, middle name, birth date, even address, all that kind of stuff. They often have to be broken down into smaller categories. You can't just put address in a field. You might have to put the street address, then the city, then the state, then the zip code in order to help organize the information and find the information faster. And what databases are you a part of? Well, Facebook. You might be on Facebook or something like that. You might use Google. And I mention this because these databases, you supply all the information. You might think, well, I'm not part of a database. Well, you are, and you supply all kinds of information that they use. You might think, wow, they let me use this stuff for free. Well, actually, they let you use it for free because you're giving them something. You're giving them lots of information that they could sell, and people can sell products to you. Did you ever search something on Google and then right away you see something on Facebook that you just search for? That's not a coincidence. So your information that you supply, all the things you like, all the groups that you belong to, all that kind of stuff, your age, your interest, all that stuff, that's all part of databases that help sell stuff to you. That's what makes the whole economy work, is that they could sell stuff to you. Back in the 70s, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, people had to tear off things on the back of brochures and send them in. That's how they got information. Or they knew things because you had subscriptions to magazines and newspapers and stuff like that. They know your interests that way. But now people gladly supply all their interests. And you might say, well, I didn't mean to do that. Well, if you ever agree to the terms of software and hit the agree button, which everybody does without reading it, then you agree to all this stuff and they could use your information. And, people do that. There's not a lot you can do to fight that. And you can't just live out in the woods off the grid. But so you just have to kind of accept that. But any website you use and you register and you log in, they're going to have your information and you're going to be part of a database. Now, we use free software in this class, so you sign up. A lot of free stuff, you might get ads because of that. Remember, there's nothing for free, so usually if it's free, there's some kind of benefit that the company's getting by letting you use it for free. They might want you to sign up for the pro version, or they may find information about you that they could help sell. You might get emails and all kinds of things about stuff that they're trying to sell you. You may be part of an interested group that may help them in targeting other people. So, there's a lot of things that you might not think of when you think of just signing up for software. You're part of a database even during school. So you're in the My Warren LMS, all your grades, your classes is in there. You're in a database also in terms of your school information, all your personal information. The school has all that for financial aid. All that's in a database. And some databases, you have to be in terms of, car registration and car insurance and utilities and bills and banking and your health care. Now when you go to the hospital, you get an app to go log in and you'll see all your medications and information and all that. It's convenient. It's easy to find things, but it's all web-based databases that people use to find information. It's faster, but it's a little scary because that information's out there, and the idea is that it has to be secure. That's why there's all these security measures to keep your information secure. Even if you forget a password, you have to do a password reset. They don't just send you your password back. You have to do a reset because anybody could get your email and say, hey, I lost my password. So what they do is they have a way to send a reset back to your email, so you still have to do it. So you're still kind of verified. How are you identified in a database? Well, all this kind of stuff. Email, username, passwords. I mentioned verifications they can do. Other kind of stuff outside of things you do on the web, your date of birth, social security number. You call anybody. You call up the cable company. You call up electric utility. You call up Verizon, you call up, you have to deal with re-registering your car and stuff like that. You might need your vehicle VIN number, your license plate number, all that kind of stuff. All these identifiers help find you in a database. That's how you're identified. Where a database is stored, they're on servers, these big computers. They're not the kind of computers that you're going to just sit around and play games on. They're computers that are set up to store information, and they're also designed to be secure. So they could be mainframe systems, they could be large workstations, it could even be a personal computer where you could use access. And there's a language called SQL, structured query language, that's used to retrieve some of this information. It's not the only language, but it's one of the languages that's used to retrieve information from databases. And you'll see these names like Oracle and SQL Server and Sybase and things like that related to databases, and especially related to web-based databases. And speaking of web-based databases, how they work on the web, if you just think about going on the web, let's say you're going to buy something from Amazon. You're going to go in your web browser and you're going to go to Amazon.com, and it's going to go here to your web server, and then you're going to log into Amazon, and it's going to take you to their database, and that's where you're going to search for all this information. All the information isn't going to be here. It's all going to be on a database. That's where you're going to retrieve all that information, and this is meant to be more in the back end, more secure. And then it comes back to the front end, you see pictures of everything, and you decide if you're going to buy it. And then when it does a transaction, it goes back here again to all that financial information that's more secure, that you're not just doing right here. So the idea of a database server is it's organizing and managing lots of information, and that's its job. The web server's information is to serve you up web pages and give you an interface that it's nice to buy things. So that's kind of the way it works. You're also going to see something called PHP script, which is a backend server type script that'll actually help retrieve information from a database. And I know I just said SQL does that, but sometimes SQL could be in a script. PHP is kind of used to bring things back and forth to the web. What operations can be performed on a database? You can just remember CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Those are the kind of the basics. That's what you really do with a database. But you find things, you sort things, you filter things, you move things, you update things. All that kind of stuff is done with a database. We're not going to create a database in here. We're just going to kind of go through it and find things and sort and filter stuff. for our exercise that we do for this. But in a database class, we would create a database right from scratch and learn how to do that, learn how to update it and all that. Databases are constructed of tables. Now, a database might have multiple tables. Just for example, if you had a company, you might have tables for all your inventory. You might have tables for all your office supplies. You might have inventories for all your customers, for all your salespeople. Anything like that may all be in separate tables. If you think of like a school database, we may have a database for faculty, adjunct faculty, administration, staff, all that kind of stuff where different information, and students obviously would be in a separate table, but it could be in a large database that's all together for the school. This is an example of a database in Access. We're not going to use Access. We usually do that in the classroom. When we have access to Access, because it's part of the Microsoft suite, it's not part of any Mac suite, by the way. If you have Mac version of Office, you're not going to find Access, but on the Windows version of Office, you'll find Access, and it's not a lot of fun. You're not going to sit around and have a lot of fun with it. Matter of fact, it feels very 90s-ish when you work on it. It doesn't feel very modern when you work on it, and it's not the easiest program to work with. But tables of databases are actually fairly simple when you think about it. I mean, you don't have to know calculus or anything to do this. It's basically you're having records of information, and they're organized by columns or fields. You'll see both names, columns or fields, customer, salesman, product, all that stuff. Sometimes they're called columns. They look like columns. Sometimes they're called your fields, depending on the software application you're using. But everything's in a table here. So it's pretty simple. You just need to go through and find stuff. That's really it. And if you're really good at finding things and really good at working with databases, there's a lot of work in the database field. Now here's design view in Access. They call this design view because if you design a database, you're going to set up all the fields, all the columns, and you're even going to determine the data type, meaning some fields might have numbers, some fields might have text, some fields might have currency, some fields might have dates, some fields might be yes or no, or have just a choice of some things that you may choose from them. So those are considered their field properties. They might have a data type, they might have a field property, but that's when you design a database. We're not going to design a database, at least in this class. Sometimes we do. We design a SpongeBob database. You'll probably see videos of that. But in here, we're just going to go through a database and retrieve information is what we're going to do. And we're not going to use Access. We're going to use PHPMyAdmin. And again, on a PC, you can use Access, and sometimes we have a president's database and a country's database. We're actually going to use the country's database on a web-based database and use PHPMyAdmin. Now, just to go through what we do with a database, here's some SQL, this select asterisk from. That's the basic start of a lot of SQL queries. Select all from, and then you put a table name, and then you can filter it down by saying where something, a name starts with something. That's not the actual code, but you can find all the entries from this table with a grade point average higher than 3.5 to see who's on the honor roll or something like that. So you can sort things, you could filter stuff. So you could run all kinds of queries. You could cross-check things. So that's all stuff that you would do with this SQL language with a database. And we're going to use PHPMyAdmin, which will use SQL. You could use SQL with Access as well, and actually I find that easier than actually using the tools sometimes, but we're going to use this. And just because it says PHPMyAdmin, we're not going to use PHP, we're just going to use SQL. But they call it that because PHP a lot of times is the scripting server-side code that actually goes back and forth, and you can actually put SQL inside that code to deliver it from a database back to a web page. That's PHP will actually do that for you. But we're going to just do some SQL in a web-based database with PHPMyAdmin, and we're going to use the SQL language. And it stands for Structured Query Language. I think it said that on an earlier slide. And it kind of looks like this. It looks a little scary at first, but we're going to go into somewhere in a demo version that's online and go into the country table, which is part of the larger world database. And then we're just going to run some queries about different countries and learn about geography a little bit. Now here's the column or field design. We don't have to do anything here. We're not going to design anything, but this is how the countries table is set up. They have a code, a single identifying code, then there's the name of each country, the continent it's from, the region it's from, surface area, which is how big it is, population. We could use some of that to learn some things about geography. And we're going to run queries just like this. We're going to have a tab, an SQL tab, and we'll put select all from country where continent equals North America. And guess what it'll show up? We'll go here and it'll be like, oh, look at that. There's 37 countries in North America. And we'll get our results here in the green part up at the top. And that's where we'll find out our results, and we'll actually just kind of write it down and turn it in. And that's what we're going to do for our exercise. So we're going to use PHPMyAdmin, and we're going to go into a world database, and we're going to do some queries and learn about databases that way. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of an overview of databases. It's not very exciting, but it's very important, very relevant to your life right now. And stay tuned for another video, which is going to work with the countries table to do some SQL queries using PHPMyAdmin.